right? So you actually have to have a set of metrics about implementation of your program. And then as time goes on and you actually accomplish those goals and you actually have those controls implemented, or you're actually performing the security activities that you've prescribed for that organization, then you need to actually shift to a slightly different set of metrics to actually measure it on an ongoing basis, right? So it's really measuring implementation of the control, and then after that, measuring operations of that control, right? So it's a little bit different. So that's the whole idea of you kind of have to shift scales a little bit as you mature. Okay, and then the last thing I'll mention, because it just comes up a lot. Lots of times I'm in hallway conversation and people will say, okay, well, tell me about this BSIM versus SAM thing. Or tell me about like how this compares to SDL, or should I use SAM, or should I be using SDL, or should I use BSIM? And the answer is, it doesn't matter, really. At the end of the day, if you think about all the lessons I just went through, you're going to have to make those kinds of arguments and make those kinds of decisions, regardless of the model that you pick. And if you actually look at the contents of any of these models, right, they all, not all, the Venn diagram would almost be a circle, right, with just little bits around the edge. In fact, I just recently, and we'll be releasing it pretty soon, did an activity-to-activity mapping between BSIM and SAM, for instance, right? So there's 72 activities in SAM, there's 110 or 109 activities in BSIM. You map them all together and you have about 2 or maybe 3 that don't map cleanly between the two. And they're things that are relatively small, right? And things that are sort of on the outside edge of what security is about. Like, for instance, one of them is a BSIM activity about your organization should host third-party security events, right? So we don't have that in the SAM model, but it's in the BSIM model. Relatively inconsequential when it comes to the actual risk reduction factor, right? So it's actually, the majority of activities we all agree upon. So the idea is, regardless of which model you pick, you're going to have to spend some time actually going through the process of customizing it, making it into controls, formulating what kinds of roles and responsibilities you have, working out the process flows, and actually implementing those activities. So that's the short answer, at least. Okay, so those are effectively the lessons learned that I wanted to share. And so from here, I want to try to pivot a little bit and then talk a little bit about the structure of the model. So for those of you that looked at it before, this may be a real quick review, but I wanted to, for those that haven't seen the model, at least talk a little bit about how it's structured and what it looks like. So first off, I want to talk a little bit about just the drivers for a maturity model. So if you look at a lot of the sort of traditional secure SDLC models, CLASP being one of them, if you're familiar with CLASP, and it's an OWASP project as well, you can look at it and it just sort of has a big collection of activities, and it doesn't really give you a lot of guidance specifically. And so around what to do next, right? It's a ton of information, but it's not really a guide that someone could pick up as a non-security guy and understand where they should start. So what we've done with at least the maturity model-based approach is just take into account the fact that an organization is going to change very slowly over a period of time, right? You can't just go from doing nothing to doing everything overnight. Just not practical and really probably not desirable, right? So the idea here is that to basically make a model, or at least the drivers behind the OpenSAM model, was to make a model that we can actually understand what our long-term goals are, but still have short-term goals that we can work against, right? So we can iterate and actually make improvements in short, measurable iterations, but still work towards the same long-term goal and the same consistent goal. So that's the general idea there. The other factor that's important to note is that there's no single recipe that's the same for all organizations, right? So we can't just say this is the right activities to do and everyone should do them to the following extent for every piece of software, go forth and do them, right? Because every organization is kind of in a unique position with regard to the risk they face from their software. So if you're, a Microsoft, right, you're going to have, if you have a vulnerability in a particular piece of software, not only do you have to find it and patch it, but you also have to get millions and millions of people to install that patch before that vulnerability goes away, right, or before the consequences of that vulnerability go away. Whereas if you're, say, a bank and you have a whole online, banking environment and you find a bug, you really just have to install it and fix it in your server farm that you control, and then that bug has disappeared from the face of the universe, right? So there's different consequences, and therefore, you should probably react in terms of activities a little bit differently. Beyond that, it's important that we have things that are prescriptive, and really at the end of the day, any process that's well thought out should be simple, well defined, and measurable, right? So that's the simple part. Okay. So now on to, real quickly, just to cover the basics of the SAM model. And I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time for questions here, so I'll zip through this pretty fast. So the top-level structure of the SAM model is based around 4 business functions, which are governance, construction, verification, and deployment. And the idea is that we really started with things that were inherent to software development, right? These really have nothing to do with security specifically. They're just about software development. And the idea is, if you start with sort of the core business functions, and by business function I mean any organization that's doing development has to some degree, provide these 4 things, right? Or you have to fulfill these 4 things. So the idea is that you could actually take the security activities or the security practices that you expect to see and map them up underneath these business functions that are inherent to software development. Which sort of leads us to the next piece of what the actual security practices are in the model, right? And so just to real quickly go through them, under governance, first we have strategy and metrics, which is all about how you're actually building your program and how you're actually measuring your software security program. You have policy compliance, which is how are you actually monitoring your external regulatory drivers that relate to security, especially software security. And further, how are you actually internalizing those, meaning taking those external regulatory drivers and making sure that you have a consistent set of policies and development standards in your dev shop to ensure that you're actually going to be meeting those requirements. We have education and guidance, which is how are you making sure that you have the right knowledge in the right people's heads as far as the people that you have that's involved in the software development process, so all the way from dev managers to the actual people writing code to the project managers and so forth. Okay, so those are the governance-related practices. Then we have the construction-related practices. So first is threat assessment, right? Which is you have to understand what kind of protections you want to put into place. So you have to understand what kinds of threats or what kinds of likely attack scenarios or failure scenarios are going to be possible for the piece of software, right? So that's the first piece. The second is security requirements, right? Which is what are you doing to actually proactively specify the correct behavior of the software that you're building, right? So that you understand what your target is, right, when you go into the dev process. We have secure architecture, which is what are you doing to actually use, or rather reuse, common security frameworks or common application frameworks in your organization so that you can actually build something securely once, do a lot of testing, do some verification, do something about the actual, or do some design analysis, whatever the case may be, and then reuse that framework so that you're not constantly reinventing the security wheel, and more specifically, not reinventing it poorly. So those are the construction-related practices. Then we have verification practices, which are design review, code review, and security testing. And these sort of correspond to the three different aspects of software that you can actually analyze, right? And so, in fact, I used this example in the class I was teaching a couple days ago, which was, if I asked you to come up and put software in my hand, what are you actually going to put in my hand? Right? And there's multiple right answers to that question. You could put source code in my hand, you could drop a big design spec and a requirements doc. Those are two vastly different things, but they both sort of are software, right? Because software in and of itself is sort of an intangible. You could actually drop a whole running machine in my hand, right, that's plugged into the wall, running a piece of software, and you've still succeeded in the question of put software in my hand, right? So the idea is that we're really, these three verification activities correspond to the three different views, if you will, of software that we have in terms of analyzing tangible artifacts of the software development process. Okay, and then we have the deployment-related practices, which are vulnerability management, environment hardening, and operational enablement. So vulnerability management is around understanding external vulnerability reports and managing the vulnerabilities so that to make sure you patch appropriately, or to make sure that you actually, when you find vulnerabilities internally even, make sure that they're run aground and that you actually extract some information from it and feed it back into your process. Environment hardening is about basically making sure that the rest of the pieces of software that are involved or surrounding the piece of software that you wrote are actually secure as well. And then we have operational enablement, which is really about transferring information, right? So when you're building a piece of software, typically you have security-related information that's in the heads of the developers or the architects of that system, and you really want to do something to transfer that knowledge to the people that are actually going to need it. So the people that are actually running the piece of software, or the actual operators, and in some cases, the actual end users. Okay, so those are the 12 practices related to how the SAM model actually sort of works. So I'll real quickly actually go into this because I'm getting close to the end of my time. So let me actually explain a little bit about each of those security practices, right? So inside of each security practice, you actually have different degrees, right? So I could say I do education and guidance, but what does that mean really? So what we did was that we built 3 levels underneath each of those 12 practices. And those 3 levels correspond to, well, they're just level 1, 2, and 3, and they roughly correspond, at least in the mental model, to crawling, walking, and running, right? And so the idea is, this is this education and guidance practice, just to show you one as an example. But the idea is at level 1, you're doing something like offering information to developers. At level 2, you're getting a little bit more role-specific about the guidance that you're offering developers. And then at level 3, you're dialing it up another notch, and you're saying, okay, you now have to take specific classes. Not only that, we're going to test you on some factors or on some of that knowledge that you should be retaining. So that's the general idea there. Okay. Now, besides that, for each of the SAM levels, so we have the 12 practices, we have 3 levels under each, and this is actually one where we kind of map in per level a bunch of extra metadata, right? So we have not only the objective and the activities like we just looked at, we actually describe those activities with about 2 to 3 paragraphs of text. In addition to that, there's some bullets about results, meaning what's the actual impact to your organization, what do you actually expect in terms of benefits to your organization or new deliverables that you would be producing if you're actually operating at this particular SAM level. In addition to that, there are things like success metrics and some estimates of costs and your personnel overhead and things of that nature for each of the levels, just to give you an idea of how that would work. Other than that, though, you know what? Actually, I think I'm going to skip ahead for a second here and actually talk real quickly about the actual SAM project, just to finish up here, because I wanted to take a couple of questions if there are some. So stats about the SAM project. Well, before I jump into stats about the SAM project, I will say this. There are actually tons of other resources in the SAM document that I haven't mentioned here. Resources that allow you to do things like actually conduct an assessment, so you can take whatever activities you have in place in your organization, map yourself against the model, and then determine sort of what levels you're at, as well as resources to help you build a roadmap so you can understand how you should improve. There's other pieces in there as well, like case studies and so forth. So there's a lot of information. I encourage anyone to check it out. In fact, when you download it, it's about a 100-page document, so don't freak out because you don't actually have to read the whole 100-page document. There's actually, I think on page 2 or 3, there's a topical table of contents which says, I would like to ... And so it actually gives you like sort of an amended table of contents for what sections you want to read depending on what your goal is. Not only that, it also has little markers on it that tell you whether or not you actually should read that section or if you can just kind of skim it. So we tried to make it easy, right? Okay, so let me talk real quick about the SAM project itself. Some quick stats that I just grabbed relatively recently is that just based on conversations and folks that I've talked to and even companies that I've worked with firsthand, we have at least 40 organizations that I know of that are actually building programs that were inspired in some way based on the SAM model. Now, they're all not rigorously using the model exactly as it's structured, but they're using it at least in some way to help bootstrap their software security program, which is kind of cool. And I actually just pulled some stats from the website recently, and in the last 12 months or so, we have about 7,500 unique hits, which actually was kind of staggering to me. I had no idea that it would be that high, which is kind of cool. And there's actually a lot of different contributed tools and resources. In fact, at this conference, a couple of people have walked up and showed me some pretty cool tools that I didn't even know existed. So we'll hopefully get some of that stuff packaged up and wrapped up and sent out so that everyone can, or at least post it up on the webpage, so that people can download it and have a little bit of tool support for actually building out either assessments against the model or plotting like the graphs and things like that that are specific to your own organization. So, other than that, in terms of what we're doing as far as where the project is going, we have, well, I would really like to, by the end of the year, actually put together another release, and so we're sort of in the process, really in the infancy of just getting together a group of folks that'll actually be sort of responsible for the project. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit, and actually I've talked to a few folks individually that would just kind of help contribute to the project, or that have helped contribute to the project in the past. So we're going to try to get maybe like a core team together and use that to sort of drive what's the next set of features that we should be trying to build into this, and where should we be taking it, right? Because We don't want this to just be a document that we released once and then never update or never sort of